Hello, everyone, and welcome to Open Observability Talks. I'm your host, Utan Horvitz, and here at Open Observability Talk, we talk about anything DevOps, observability, and open source. So may the open source be with you. And for those joining the live stream on YouTube or Twitch, feel free to share questions and comments on the chat. Definitely going to make the episode much more interesting for all of us. And with that, let's move on to today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about OpenShift and about observability, our favorite topic here on the show. OpenShift is an open source container application platform championed by Red Hat. It brings Docker and Kubernetes together to help organizations build, deploy, and manage containerized applications. And for today's episode, I invited Radek Vokál to join me. Radek is a senior manager in Red Hat's observability product management team, essentially, and he has over 20 years at Red Hat. He's been involved in OpenShift from the engineering and the product side, and is currently a lead in the product management team for OpenShift Observability. So let me add Radek to the live stream. Hey, Radek.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And Dotan, I love the t-shirt. It's great.
Thanks, and may the open source be with you as well.
Thanks for the introduction, Dotan. Yeah, it's true that I've been in open source for some time. I even say I started with Linux in 1999, so pretty much in last century. So yes, it's been a while.
Yeah, so 20 years at Red Hat, that's a major milestone. So tell us maybe a bit about your journey there in a nutshell.
Sure. So I've already mentioned 1999 is where I started with Linux, and that was at my university days. I was really interested in robotics, and Linux was a great way how I can control different things and how I can play with different toys that we had available at the university. Fast forward, as I got excited about the whole open source world and the fact that I can touch the code, I can do some modifications there. It does what I wanted to do, and I understand why it is that. So again, got excited about this. And when I was finishing university, I started looking for some real job. Previously, I had different sidekicks, and I was admin, and I even wrote some web pages in PHP because that was the thing back in the days. So I was looking for something real, right? And I found this advertisement saying Linux developer wanted. It didn't say a company name, it didn't say anything. And I applied, I got accepted. And after that, I realized that this is for Red Hat. And I'm not going to be just developing a application of some sort. I'm going to be working on the distribution itself. That was the days when Red Hat decided to open an office in Czech Republic. Should have mentioned, I'm based out of Brno, Czech Republic, beautiful city, by the way. So Red Hat decided to build an office here, and I was one of the first employees. My journey through Red Hat was also interesting. I started as a package maintainer. I was responsible for a large number of components in the open source space, in Fedora and then Red Hat Enterprise Linux distributions. And there were interesting challenges back in the days. Each distribution carried a different patch set. It was kind of all over the place. Testing wasn't really a thing. If it installs, ship it. That was basically the goal there. So again, a lot of interesting challenges, how to pursue some quality metrics and tests and standards across the open source projects and how to put them together. And I got excited about that thing too. So I became responsible for initiatives that were cross components, cross also distributions. We're doing things like porting applications into IPv6 back in the days, adopting new architectures, working with different partners, and again, distributions themselves. And over the time, I started picking up things. We started even building some new projects. Some of those projects exist to today. Some of them are hated and some of them are loved, as always, right? But I was responsible for like software management type of things. We introduced the concept of like software collections and modules. Those were the hated ones. We changed the software management package manager from YUM to DNF, and we introduced a lot of new concepts there. So a lot of great stuff happened. But you've mentioned OpenShift. OpenShift at one point became a really interesting thing. For me, it was the evolution of what we were already doing with the distribution. but on a really different scale. So it can work in the data centers. It can work with a large number of machines and basically up-levels the application development to a brand new standard. So yes, got excited about it. Moved a portion of my engineering team into OpenShift back in the days and started working with OpenShift engineering. By the way, that was probably the most amazing team of people that I ever worked with. All the OpenShift engineers that we had, some of them are still around to today, were upstream developers. And it was exciting to see that these people are 3 years ahead of us, right? They were thinking about really the future, where Kubernetes is heading. And again, Kubernetes is celebrating 10 years right now. This is pretty much when Kubernetes started. So it was great to see that vision that they had back in the days, it was the right thing. They actually did the right thing with the whole distribution of not only Kubernetes, but also the components around that. And OpenShift is right now running in different environments, different customers, different setups. We have different flavors of it. Again, it's amazing how it expanded. So yeah.
So you know, we mentioned OpenShift a few times, and you talked about Kubernetes, but I'm not sure that everyone I know, I've known OpenShift for quite some time, but maybe not all of our listeners. So give us what OpenShift is.
That's a very good question. For me, it's a distribution of components on top of Kubernetes that form basically an application platform. And if you look at it into a greater perspective, the 2 or 3 main things that I see there that are different from what standard Kubernetes offers is the concept of operators. So it allows us to ship different components with its own operation guidelines on how the component behaves, what happens when it upgrades, what happens when it doesn't, things like this. And then the other part that I really like about OpenShift, like there are many other features, but the other part that I like is that it's very much focused on features powered and using the telemetry stack. So basically the monitoring and then telemetry stuff is baked into the distribution, and you'll find features that are leveraging basically the telemetry data coming out of the different components. And again, it's a distribution of other components. So you have the CI/CD, the OpenShift pipelines there. You have different installers on how you want to run OpenShift on different platforms. The way we actually run OpenShift or install OpenShift is that it basically supported on bare metal, it's supported on different public clouds. And for each of these things, you have different flavors. And when it comes to flavors of OpenShift, there's some standard setup that we have, but we over time realized that we can satisfy some specific use cases with OpenShift. So for Edge, we have single node OpenShift, single node Kubernetes that we're running. Then we are looking at Hypershift, where the control plane is centralized and you can have multiple clusters sharing the control plane, right? So it scales in both ways, basically. You can scale it to a large number of clusters and large multi-tenancy, or you can run it on the almost on edge devices, but very close to edge, rather say, and again, it works there. So that's OpenShift in a nutshell. It's very high level, but yeah, that's what it is for me.
Yeah, and I think it's important because it might be confusion. So there is the OpenShift that is open source, what used to be the OpenShift Core. I think now it's rebranded as OKD, and then there's the OpenShift as a commercialized product by Red Hat. So just to make sure that the audience is clear about this distinction, I also put the link on the live stream, and obviously it will be also part of the show notes for those listening for OKD. OKD again is the open source OpenShift. Do you want to say a word, or just again to clarify this part?
Almost in the same way as you would find the distinction between Fedora and Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we have an upstream distribution, which is OKD. The challenge with OKD, of course, is that this still requires some infrastructure where you can run it. So it's not as popular as Fedora is because you can run it on your laptop. OKD, not that easy. But again, the concept is same. The upstream distribution efforts are happening within the OKD space. And then we have the downstream enterprise version of this called OpenShift Container Platform, where we provide extended support and we especially care about the upgrades and whatnot. So that's where the difference is really.
Yeah, and that's the model that Red Hat is known for, the ability to champion a very successful open source, but then also to provide the commercial offer that comes with the with support, with services, and with SLA and so on. So I think it's a classic example. Can you tell us a bit about the open source OKD, the adopters, and a bit about where it stands with regards to the community and the usage?
So I kind of mentioned. So first, I don't know all the details there. So just like 10,000 feet view here, but the challenge with OKD is the user base that is much smaller than what you would get from like Fedora distribution. Again, the reasons are you don't really run it on a laptop. You need some infrastructure for it. But still, some of the users that we have there, which usually are universities, we can talk about CERN because they are very active in the OKD space and actually one of the driving force behind OKD. So some of these users are actually having a really large infrastructure, but also very specific requirements, very specific setup. And this is the interesting part.
That's like a super collider. That's not something.
Right.
The audience who doesn't know what you're talking about, that's major.
This is one project, but then another one where we're running OKD is the Boston University, where we have a shared project with them that is basically processing 3D images or X-ray images of brain cells, of brains, and then it creates 3D images out of that, and it's looking for tumors or something like that. So the interesting thing, and I think that's a perfect use case for OKD, where we have these universities and users looking to solve a specific use case. They really need the compute power. They need an infrastructure that is optimized maybe for a specific use case. And then because of that, it drives some interesting features and enhancements they want to do in the platform itself. So this is what we see with CERN as an example, where they have specific use cases. They have thousands of applications from different researchers running on the cluster. But these days, they have to provide them GPUs. They have to provide them an optimized infrastructure. They have to make sure that they can deliver their research projects. And again, because of that, the community helps us to shape some of these specific features.
Nice. So if you look at like the past and present, of the open source and where the community steers it, and obviously where Red Hat helps steering it, where do you see the present and maybe even where you personally see the future of the OKD project?
That's an interesting question. I'm curious about it as well, especially when I already mentioned to you that with OpenShift we're looking at different flavors, and the core is still the different, but there are a lot of different changes and tweaks for specific use cases. And again, this is where it's really hard to capture some community that would be interested in specific use case for Edge. There's probably some community, but again, is it big enough and interesting enough to really participate in this? From my perspective, the core of OpenShift and then the distribution of different components on top of Kubernetes is where the community can still help and drive it to use cases that we haven't thought about before, driving it through the use cases that are interesting for a very specific audience. But again, we can leverage those features for our own customers, and we can work with them somehow to figure out like how we can present this to a different group of users than it was originally intended to. It's kind of a role of myself as well as a product manager to combine and balance the requests that we're getting from our customers, what is happening in the community space, and again, with users like CERN, what are the features that they're driving, what our engineers are coming up with, because a lot of these ideas are coming directly from engineering, and then combining all this into something that looks great and nice, and again, solves some interesting problems for, again, the community and the customers themselves.
I think, and I used to be a product manager in past life as well, so I definitely empathize with it. I think one of the interesting positions of being a product manager, product owner, product lead in open source based project is that in addition to all the complexities of regular product management, Then you need to aggregate customer needs and use cases and industry, and then bake them into a roadmap. And here you have sort of a whole additional dimension, which is the open source. So you sort of you have like a split brain, I call it, between half a brain that needs to think about the open source project and its viability and its roadmap and its community and the needs that arise from there, and also the other part of the brain should think about the commercial product and where this aligns with where the company wants to go. And I've seen many open source projects where the company starting the project thought about the project being for one specific use case or a group of use cases, but as soon as it came to the hands of the community, a whole new suite of
expanded
up. And this, first of all, it's intriguing to see that what you build can be used for so many other things, but then again it drives a whole different suite of requirements and maybe even performance requirements and non-functional and whatnot that are derived by that. So, if you put Edge brings a whole new suite. You need to run in a low energy, low bandwidth, low, I don't know what, memory environment that is not a classic server backend thing. And that's why I think, like, as a product manager, what you said now in a nutshell, I think it's much bigger than one simple no. Being able to balance that, on the one hand, you don't deprioritize the community because it's a project on its own right, irrespective of the commercial product. And on the other hand, obviously, you have the goals, and the commercial goals and the business goals of the company, and how you combine both. And if you decide that the company does not invest, you still need to some sort of do the advocacy with the community so that they pitch in and take on not just raising issues, but actually taking the implementation themselves or something like that. So I'm just wondering, as a product guy, how you do that.
It's crazy though, Tan. It is. So there's a different aspect to this that you didn't even mention. The fact that we have customers who demand some stability from us and support for a very long time. And then you have a fast evolving upstream projects. We're talking about observability here. Just look at the number of projects that are happening within the observability space. New things are arriving. And the thing that was cool and sexy 2 years ago is probably not anymore. And the community might have shifted to something different. We're going to be talking about it probably as well. I could see that from your face. But for us, that doesn't mean that we can jump on this new technology immediately, because we still have to support the existing customers. We still have to support their setups, their environments. For our customers, they already grew their Kubernetes infrastructure tremendously over the last years, right? So we see a large number of clusters managed by our customers, thousands and thousands of applications. Any kind of technology change for them, not that easy. They're going to push back a lot. So the challenge again for us is we would love to switch to a new thing. We would love to run after that new shiny cool thing, but at the same time we need to make sure that the existing customers are still supported. If we have to move them over to a new thing, what is the migration path, and is it really worth it? Is that going to be anyhow painless for them or absolutely painful? All these kind of things. So yeah, like you said, it's kind of a split brain thing.
Yeah, no, it deserves its own whole different episode just about how to run product management for an open source alongside.
Absolutely.
But, I think it is important to say, because many discussions go around the engineering of developing and maintaining the upstream projects and the downstream distros and so on and so forth. I think not enough focus goes on the art and science of product management that makes sure that they stay focused, each one with its own directive, and you get the buy-in with the customers on the commercial, the buy-in with the community on the project, and all the balances and that are required on the way. So thanks for sharing this insight there. And I think another point that I was fascinated with your background at Red Hat was, and specifically you mentioned Kubernetes and now celebrating already a decade, but you've been there from the earlier stages. The ability, when you take Kubernetes and put it in production, especially in high scale enterprise type installations, is the aspect that is very much relevant these days, the aspect of cost and resource efficiency of Kubernetes. And I know that you've been specializing in that in a previous role that you dealt with that. So I'm wondering what are the end users patterns you've seen, what kinds of best practices you've learned, aggregated across many customers that you can share with us without.
Sure. So I'll touch on the past life thing that you mentioned first. So that gig was interesting. Within the OpenShift engineering, one thing that we've realized is that yes, the infrastructure is growing, the application base is growing. We're also getting some interesting information from the telemetry stack. We can analyze the data coming from customers and look at different patterns. And when we started actually exploring these patterns, we got horrified with some of our customers. We basically seen that there are clusters that are heavily underutilized, and there are clusters that have a lot of issues and customers didn't notice them. And we started thinking about how to actually deliver this message to customers that they can run the whole infrastructure and their applications in a more efficient way. So this is where I actually switched into product management role, because we built this portfolio of internal and external applications. We call them insights. We don't have to go into details, but the idea was, let's leverage the data to support customers better, but also offer customers some sort of guidance. We call them recommendations on how they can run their systems in a more optimized way. And again, the main reason for that was that we saw large customers who were telling us, oh, we're pretty sure that we're running our clusters 50% utilized all the time. We look at the data and it was like 10, 15%. And like, again, a lot of wasted resources. Now, this is even becoming more obvious these days when, again, the number of workloads is growing. We have customers with thousands and thousands of applications, but also with different use cases. We didn't touch on AI. Every podcast these days has to talk about AI, right? So Gen AI workloads, absolute nightmare when it comes to running them with the infrastructure. You're probably running it on an expensive hardware. You want to make sure that it's 100% utilized because, again, it's expensive. You have a lot of demand on that. How do you actually deal with this? Now, when it comes to how to solve the problem, that's where your question was heading. There's no silver bullet. And the answer probably is to use multiple things together. And I would even say that on top of that, a very good monitoring solution to understand the impact of these different things that you can do on your cluster and with the applications is crucial. Things like, yes, you can probably look at different auto-scaling methods, right? You can leverage spot instances if you're running on public cloud. You can leverage some technologies. You can look at multi-tenancy and service mesh for your services. But you always should be aware that some of these things, say service mesh as an example, come with some performance impact or with some other hit in your infrastructure. So for all of these, my perspective again is you need to be able to validate these things. You've optimized for resources, you optimize something. Does it really have the impact on the application that you were expecting? What about performance of that application? What about scalability of that application? Is it anyhow impacted? So optimizations of any sort, again, yes, make sure you monitor those and make sure you understand the impact. On our side, we have a couple projects that are trying to help with this. And one of the things, like things like resource optimization, really understanding, do I have the right resource requests and resource limits, things that are kind of obvious. And we have some tools that are trying to look at it over a specific period of time and give you some recommendations. Again, great. But when you optimize them, are you doing the right thing? The tool is going to tell you last 30 days, you haven't really used all the requests and resources, but maybe that was during vacation time, right? And maybe that's something that you would expect. So that's another thing where I would say, make sure that these recommendations that you're getting, make sure you understand the full environment of this, and again, monitor the impact. Another interesting thing that I like to pitch here is that the first rule of having your cluster optimized in a really good way is looking at really basic things like, do you really have a healthy cluster and healthy applications? Right? Because any kind of alerts, any kind of issues that you have with your underlying services actually have a big impact on again, how the cluster behaves, what's the performance of the cluster, what are the resources being used. So before starting optimizing your application itself, look at the underlying infrastructure as well, and figure out, again, are there any patterns that you can avoid and prevent, and maybe use, again, some of the recommendations that the observability stack in OpenShift gives you. And with that, I'm going to mention one more thing. We've tried different ways how come up with some different analytics algorithms and anomaly detection and these kind of things. These are all great things, but you have to connect them together. And the missing piece was always that experience with running OpenShift itself or Kubernetes itself. So we realized that every time we came up with some algorithm or anything interesting, we need to work with the right people, the subject matter experts. In our case, that's the support engineers supporting all these customers that we have on OpenShift, or even our own SRE team that supports OpenShift for our own internal services, but also the managed OpenShift that we have for our customers. And we work with them to make sure that whatever we, again, recommend and the best practices we want customers to follow are actually really meaningful. Because, again, if you just look at some data analysis and you have a data analytics person telling you this is wrong because the data looks wrong, that doesn't really connect with that experience of why it is so and what should be the right thing. So yeah, that's how we approach it.
Causality is not a correlation. That's the basic. So with all due respect to data analysts, you need to have someone that is a DevOps or SRE to pitch in and make sense out of it. And also, I think the approach of eating your own dog food or actually going to the people within your engineer organization, support, SRE, and so on, that actually do that work, the same work that your users do. It's actually, we talked about being a product manager. That's actually a luxury, because you actually have internal users that you can interview and bug, that you're less sensitive of bugging because they're part of your own team or your own organization, and they can provide you with a lot of insights that you can then translate into the external users as well. So the fact that you have internal users that are just as much as a user as anyone else is definitely an advantage. At least I found it as a product manager. Maybe the flip side that I was very cautious of is remembering, especially when talking about platforms such as OpenShift, and I've been a product manager for platforms for many, many years and different platforms, is that the platform has different usage patterns across different customers and organizations, and then you need to always remind yourself that the pattern in which your own organization, your own engineering consumes it, is not that it's wrong. It's just that this is one pattern, and applying it to other customers needs to take under advice that it might need some adjustments based on that. So I think with that in mind, it's definitely an advantage having the knowledge, the aggregated knowledge in-house that you can then take as a product manager and also as a support expert and whatnot, and bake it into best practices or even products that you can then deliver to your external users.
Again, to keep in mind, these are recommendations, and you just said it, right? Every customer, especially the large ones, I'm going to pick on those, they are Snowflake. We give them a lot of flexibility with the components that we have in OpenShift, and they have very specific use cases. In many cases, they want to differentiate themselves on the market by introducing these specific use cases to their applications, to their services. And because of that, this comes with a specific demand on the platform itself. So the challenge, like you said, is there's no one-size-fits-all approach. And you have to respect that fact that, again, there's specific use case and the flexibility that we offer to that customer to satisfy that use case.
Certainly. And I should mention to our listeners that the topic of Kubernetes cost and optimization has been a topic in our show for quite some time. We even had a dedicated episode on open cost, which is an open source project under the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, that is strictly aimed at monitoring cost aspects of running Kubernetes. So for those who are interested, do check out the episode on open cost. I put the link on our for the live stream audience on the notes, and obviously I'll put it on the show notes as well for the podcast listeners. Definitely a big topic, and thanks for sharing your tips and best practices. And now I want to go over to observability. We're in open observability talks, so
big topic, yes.
And you in your current role, now going fast forwarding to the present, you're, as we said, the lead for the OpenShift observability team. So it's a dedicated team for that, and there's a whole a pillar there. So let's start with the basics. What's observability at OpenShift?
I would even start with even more basics, and the challenge that I still see in the platform, and we have not been able to solve over the last 10 years with Kubernetes, and that's the complexity of the platform and the complexity of the applications that we run on the platform. And with that, also the number of different signals that we're getting from each single service, each single application, and how we really understand this. And the fact that, again, we even see, like I just mentioned, customers building specific use cases and specific features on top of it. The complexity of, again, applications and platform, it's something that keeps growing, and unfortunately, it's not going away. And with that actually comes the thing that we're doing here with observability. Our main thing is two, right? So basically, what is the observability platform? That's basically the right way of calling it. It's also like OpenShift itself, a distribution of different observability components that are out there available for monitoring, logging, tracing. We're going to touch on OpenTelemetry for sure. And we basically make sure that these components are available to our customers. They are supported, and again, in the same way like we do with other components, we work with the upstream communities to deliver some features, and then downstream we make sure that it's well integrated and supported within the platform itself. And for all these components, we of course have the data collection, data storage, data processing part, again, for metrics, logging, traces, OpenTelemetry itself. And that's our foundation. That's where we basically say, again, this is what absolutely has to be available on the platform, so you can do the basic use cases of scraping your logs from applications, understanding them, analyzing them, and whatnot, processing them. That's our core part. But then we make sure that these things are actually integrated within the different interfaces that we have for our customers. Our main thing for OpenShift is the OpenShift App Console. It comes with every OpenShift cluster. It's a nice web interface. And for each of these signal types, we have an interesting UI. I'm going to say basic UI, not basic. It's good, but it's not a fancy UI. It solves some basic problems that you will have with the platform. It helps you to troubleshoot the platform or look at the performance issues that you might have with your applications. And the similar thing is actually integrated into Red Hat ACM, the Advanced Cluster Manager. OpenShift Web Console is focused on a single cluster observability and a single cluster management, but a lot of our customers are working with a large number of clusters. That's where we have a product called Advanced Cluster Management, and we, of course, leverage that for observability as well, so you can monitor your clusters across the whole account, across the whole fleet of clusters that you have. Again, this is the basic stuff, right? This is what you would expect, kind of. But then we actually look at, I already mentioned, the complexity challenges and how we can actually allow customers and enable the customers to be able to navigate better within this millions of different logs, signals, traces, metrics, and whatnot, and how they can actually solve some problems with this. The thing with monitoring and observability is, and that's also evolving, that when we started with observability, the primary focus was on the application itself, right? Is it running, and is it still serving my users? That was the one, probably, and only question that we had. But then we realized that with observability, we can actually answer multiple other questions. Not only health and performance things, but we've already touched on cost, right? Is it running and how much is it actually costing me to run this application? And should I run it in a more efficient way, cheaper somewhere else, things like this. What about energy efficiency, right? That's another hot topic these days. And we can probably look at the application or the infrastructure again from the perspective of if I tune it somehow or move the application from one data center to another, is that going to be running in a different way or more energy efficient? Business decisions. Do I still have to run this application because does it serve the purpose, or is it just an expensive thing that is running in my infrastructure and it's not really generating the value that I would expect from that? What about some customer behaviors, right? And things like this. So, or maybe even architecture changes. Should I use a new technology instead of my classic approach? Is that going to have the impact? So again, my point is that we're getting more and more questions that the observability stack should and can answer. And because of that, our role right now is more shifting towards being able to analyze the data, correlate the different signal types together, be able to integrate that with different tools these different users and personas are using, and being able to serve, again, different use cases. So what is happening in our space these days a lot is building really a stack of analytics components that are able to correlate different type of signals. Troubleshooting, one of the main use cases. We want to make sure that when you troubleshoot an issue, you can look at the logs and to understand why is that happening. You can look at the alerts to understand where is it happening. You can correlate them together so you find the same information or same time frame of the information from both. But when you have one alert, you usually have multiple alerts as well, right? And all of a sudden it cascades. So that's another project, another component that we're leveraging that is basically looking at all the alerts that were happening within the same time frame, within the proximity of the components. We give them an incident label and say, these are probably somehow related. Because of that, we're able to analyze these things and kind of point at the one signal that is most probably the root cause of an issue, right? 1 or 2 or 3, still better than the 60 alerts that I might be getting. 60 is too much, but a lot of noise that I would be getting. So this signal to noise reduction is one of the main things that we're looking at to narrow down the scope. I think the root cause is too strong thing here, right? It's not going to tell you maybe this is exactly the problem, but instead of 20 components, I can only look at 2, 3 maybe, and then start troubleshooting there. It's still better than what I had before, right? Yeah. So again, the work that we're doing in this space right now is heavily focused on how can I put these information together? How can I answer some of the questions for different users? And then a lot of the other work is happening in making sure that these kind of information, the raw data and these analytics kind of data, can be well integrated in different tools and different platforms. I already mentioned we offer some basic interfaces within OpenShift Web Console and within Advanced Cluster Management tool. It's great, but we know our users are using different other tools, right? They are using tools for incident management. The finance people will be using Power BI or something like this because that's what they love and they use every day. So our role is also to make sure that specific data for different personas, different use cases can be exposed to these users, and they can make their business decision on this. They can file tickets to their development teams if they don't follow the recommendations we give them about resources and things like this. So that's where the platform stands right now. And again, it's only as good as the integrations actually are with these different tools. We're not aiming at solving all the problems that are out there, but we're making sure that we can enable these different workflows with the different tools that are out there available to our customers.
Yeah, and I think that what you said and the insight, the direction that you're taking is very much aligned with what I see in the industry. And actually, I've been talking about that for a good few years. That we need to shift as an industry from wasting so much time about the raw data and how to visualize logs or how to investigate traces or whatnot, and into a higher level tier, looking at observability as a data analytics problem and addressing it in the analytics way. So I think that, and I actually wrote like an article for big data folks. I think at least 2 years ago. I'm putting here an article that I wrote back in the day, but that's really the signal to noise ratio that you mentioned, the ability to correlate different signals and take a multitude of alerts or events or other raw data items into an aggregated insight. This is the core of what we need to do as an industry and as a community.
True.
So fascinating to see that also driven with you folks at Red Hat. I also want to touch about the fact that something that obviously I related to is that a lot of your stack choice is based on open source. So not surprising for Red Hat, obviously, but specifically on the open source front, you've been very loyal to the open source and also to the preferences that you've seen amongst your customers, right?
I would say a lot means like 99%. Now, truth is that when we look at the observability work these days and what we're doing at Red Hat, there are certain components that, especially when we talk about like fleet level analysis, there are certain things that run within our premises because it just makes sense. It works with all the data that we're getting across the fleet and customer sensitive data, maybe of things like this, right? So, but for all the other stuff, yes, this basically means we're leveraging different existing open source components, or even we're seeding some new ones. And every time we start new thing, we're making sure that that project has an open source path. Now, I'm going to bring one example that is fairly recent, signal correlation or the project correlator. I mentioned that correlation between alerts and logs. We've basically explored the CNCF space and the open source space. We realized that this is a gap, and we started this project that right now has a community participation from different communities and even our customers who tried out our dev preview feature and they wanted to actively participate in improving that. So that's, again, a great example where we said, hey, there's a gap. We have only a limited number of engineers that can help with this. So let's seed it in upstream. And let's make sure that this is now, I believe, in the CNCF sandbox. So let's make sure that it's even part of this larger community of the CNCF world and get some attention there and hopefully becomes an interesting component again for other products or other projects out there. This is one great example. I know you love talking about the other one, that's Perses. So one of the challenges we had recently was with Grafana. We love these guys there, by the way, but they made some changes in the licensing that didn't really allow us to do what we were doing before. And we realized that we're not the only ones who got bitten by this. And we started working with the people who reach out to us, customers, and again, community members, who basically said, there's a problem and we need some help in solving this, and we don't really have that experience with starting a new upstream project. So we helped to, again, seed this upstream project with a specific focus, not to replace the whole Grafana ecosystem, but again, focus on a problem that we had with integrating some dashboards within our interfaces. And that basically becomes another CNCF sandbox project that hopefully will evolve over the time, will get some attention. And again, something where
project, just to stand corrected, it's a Linux Foundation project, and it's submitted, it applied to becoming a CNCF sandbox project, but I think it's still under review. But hopefully that we can record you and we cash out on that too much time. But
it's aiming there. That's true.
Project. And just for our listeners, so Perses started actually as an internal tool or project, and then it was open sourced. And now Red Hat, part of the champions there, and others. So, and we had a whole dedicated project back in the early days of Perses with Creator. So I put the link here for the live stream audience. I put it also on the show notes. But if you are interested on the monitoring and the visualization or metric visualization, let's put it this way, I think a very fascinating open source project. And again, thank you for the Red Hat folks and your team in particular that really helped pushing. I saw the latest releases with showing a tracing visualization with different views and so on.
True.
So really good to see the progress being made on the project and the contribution of your team to the effort there.
So you just mentioned the tracing thing. Tracing was great because they had a special demand for a different type of chart. Again, they developed this for tracing, but their first step was, let's make sure that it's available in Perses. It can be leveraged by, again, the community that is already using Perses. And then we adapted it back to the product. So upstream first still. Again, something that I'm personally excited about because, like I mentioned, 20 years ago, I started with this mantra and we still have it in the company. That's awesome.
Yeah, so let's talk a bit about what's heading next. What's in the roadmap, both for the open source OpenShift and for you folks in terms of OpenShift?
Absolutely. I think there are a couple interesting things and a couple interesting gaps that we're trying to solve right now. And again, we'll see whether this will result in seeding some new projects as well, or whether we can combine the existing things together. Basically, three challenges that I'm looking at as a product manager these days. One is the large number of components that we have available is bringing some challenges. The challenges, again, is this different flexibility, or are they actually stepping on each other's toes when you install them side by side, and things like this happens. So we're trying to make sure that we can offer to our customers some sort of, I'm going to say, almost opinionated way on how you install things, how you manage the observability stack, but also being able to tell them, hey, there are interesting features. If you actually just installed the log stack and you already have monitoring in place, you should also leverage the signal correlation because it uses logs and alerts and puts them together. So the idea is that we want to seed, and we already seeded a project called Observability Operator that allows you to install the components for different signal types, but also it carries different extensions and features when it comes to this analytics functionality, like Correlator is actually one of those. And for OpenShift Web Console, it actually carries the UI definitions as well. So that means that when you, again, enable a specific signal type, you just mentioned tracing and the new UI there, you will get the UI in the OpenShift Web Console Observe section. A similar work is actually happening around the multi-cluster observability in the Advanced Cluster Management project. Same approach, different technology in the background, but the problem is same, right? We want to make sure that when customers are looking at logs, they will get the right components from us. They will get some default configuration, so it almost works out of the box. Instead of 20 steps they have to do to configure the thing, they will probably do 4 steps. But again, we reduce that significantly. And again, out of the box, they will be getting some of the analytics features. Like one thing that we just introduced in ACM is right sizing across the fleet, telling the administrators who are the biggest offenders across the cluster, fleet of clusters, when it comes to underutilizing the resources that they have. It's actually an interesting thing because if you're an administrator of a large fleet of clusters, you cannot really look at every single namespace, every single project to see, are they doing the right thing? Do they follow the best practices and guidelines that we have in the company? So it's an interesting thing from also the perspective that ACM is becoming the tool for SRVs, and they are asking us for these kind of features that help them to, again, understand what is happening on the fleet of clusters. But again, project that is happening there, multi-cluster observability, a way how we want to install and enable customers with different features and different functionality. Both will be open source projects, or actually open source project. So that's one problem that I have here. Another interesting thing is happening around OpenTelemetry. I'm surprised we haven't talked about it yet, but you've probably noticed the second largest CNCF project these days, right? It's huge, it's interesting, and it solves a lot of problems that we had for multiple years when it comes to logs and really having some sort of a unified logging where I can actually find the right information from all the services, all the applications that are running in the same format, in the same shape, right? There have been multiple projects in the past that tried to solve that, but this one is really doing it. So I'm excited about OpenTelemetry. And that for us means that we're trying to leverage it as much as possible as well. We're trying to make sure that it's well integrated within the observability platform. So we have the OpenTelemetry collector, and we're extending it with some of the extensions and plugins that are available in the OpenTelemetry community. But also we're looking at how we can use OpenTelemetry as a standard for exposing data. I've mentioned integration with different monitoring tools, third parties. OpenTelemetry seems like the perfect way of doing it and using it for. So leveraging that as much as we can. But eventually, I feel like OpenTelemetry can actually help us to solve even some of these analytics problems, maybe, or being able to leverage all the metadata that you carry with the different spans and signals out there. And again, it brings some opportunities for additional analytics efforts on top of that as well. So that's another project that we're actively participating right now, and you will see more and more OpenTelemetry being available within the observability platform.
Yeah, and actually, important to say with regards to OpenTelemetry that this is not a trick. Again, going back to the product manager perspective, it's a sexy new project and everyone wants to be there. It's on one hand, but on the other hand, Red Hat has been investing for years in building out its own way of generating, emitting, and collecting telemetry. So it is a migration path with its own cost. So I think looking at it realistically, not just because it's the hot new kid on the block, but because you really see as a product owner that this solves you a major pain of the cross-platform multi-source that justifies this migration is also a very interesting point to share, right?
Again, I mentioned previously, anytime we mention the word migration, it gives me shivers because I know about the customers who will be telling me, we cannot do this for whatever reason. OpenTelemetry does not provide all the features that some of the customers might be used to when they use the logging stack or Prometheus and metrics, right? So there's always some but in general, I agree with you. So yeah, that OpenTelemetry, again, it's something that we're looking at. And the third thing, I've already mentioned that quite a lot. It's the analytics effort and making sure that we basically build a suite of different components. I'm actually really glad that we're not looking at analyzing the data as a single thing, but rather we're leveraging different components and building small components that are doing the signal correlation, the alert grouping. We also looked at anomaly detection and we realized that it's not really providing that great result, so we might or might not even use it. We'll see, right? But all these individual components are giving us some sort of additional information, right? Some sort of additional signal. And we're putting it together in a form of, again, different workflows. Troubleshooting would be the one, right? You want to start with some higher level information when you troubleshoot an issue, and then be able to drill into specific details and choose your own path, how you going to troubleshoot and solve this problem. Where are you going to solve it? Is there a proactive way how I can actually react to some issues that didn't even happen yet? Or is there a reactive thing where I can adjust something and get immediately rid of that issue? And also make sure that this never happens again. So where is that going to be land when it comes to my CI/CD or DevOps pipeline or whatever I'm using to deploy the cluster and application? So there are interesting challenges there, and that's where we want to make sure that we feed the path and the pipelines with the right data.
That sounds good. We're getting towards the end of this part. So I did put the link for the work of your team, redhat.com/observability, on the live stream for the guests of the live stream. I will also put it on the show notes for the listeners on the podcast. So definitely follow up and read more about some of these goodies that are up and coming. And also, I think that you mentioned that your team next month, we were recording that now in August, beginning of August, and September, there's the PromCon Europe in Berlin. So I think your team is going to be there. It's also an opportunity.
We're going to be busy for sure.
Right?
So yes, there's PromCon in September, I believe 11th, 12th in Berlin. but we've already chatted that we'll probably meet each other on Open Source Summit in Vienna as well. There are other places, other conferences. And yes, the Reddit.com/observability is a great source. There are a lot of blog posts that you'll be able to find from my team, but also our engineering team. They have a lot of great ideas and a lot of, again, different use cases, how they will use their components, the stack, and what kind of purposes or what kind of problems they're solving. So I absolutely encourage you to go through these and give us feedback as well. That's another thing that's always gold for product managers, right?
Yeah.
Let us know if you don't like something. Scream at me. Let me know. Talk to me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter and some other places. So let us know if you would love to see something different from Reddit Observability, or we're missing out something important.
Yeah, so definitely. There's also already on YouTube, and I will also put it on when we publish the show on the podcast apps, your LinkedIn and your Twitter. So definitely for reaching out directly to you, highly recommended, Radek. And as you also mentioned, good opportunities for FaceTime in PromCon in Europe in the second week of September, and then the week after that at Open Source Summit Europe by the flagship event of the Linux Foundation. And I'll be there as well, as you mentioned. But for the Red Hat team, the Red Hat team is there if you want to get some FaceTime with you personally and with your team. That's a great opportunity. And I'll be, I think, at the same week also at SRE Day. If anyone happens to be in London, I'll be speaking there as well. And in Dev Talks in Romania and Cluj. So different opportunities. But definitely follow up and check out the links that we provide. Very good. And also, do you want to say where people can engage with the community, with the open source OKD, with that regard, where the community forum and chatter is happening?
Yeah, well, honestly, there's no one place that serves all the communities. So I would basically encourage you to go look after the community that interests you. OKD is a huge thing, and maybe you want to focus more on specific components, and go find these components and you'll find the communication channels.
Sounds good. Great. So thanks so much for that. And now, as always, we go to the interesting part, as we call it, the breaking news. And with that, I would like to first highlight maybe one of the biggest things that happened in the last month: CrowdStrike taking down Microsoft Windows users, shutting down airports, so hospitals, governments, and more. The blue screen of death popped up everywhere. Good thing I'm on the Mac. So that's definitely something that impacted the industry. Actually, 2 weeks later, then they had a major Azure outage for, I think, over 10 hours, which then turned out to be a DDoS attack. So it just, again, goes back to showing us how critical it is when we handle our CI/CD pipelines, when we release something, the guarantees to our customers, even in the largest of scales. So I'm putting here something that I wrote on the topic for those who missed. Did you get any? What were your thoughts when you saw this happening?
Of course, I'm spoiled with my topic. It tells me how important observability is. Even within your CI/CD pipeline, you really need to monitor for the impact, and you have to have quality metrics, SLAs, SLOs. When you do upgrades or when you do any kind of changes to your infrastructure, are you doing the right thing? So observability plus.
I'm signing off on this one. That's for sure. And just the people not say that we're only talking about one cloud vendor and not the other. On the AWS side, there was actually a major happening. Also in the past few weeks, AWS essentially decided to take down a bunch of services, Cloud9, SimpleDB, Code Commit, and others. And the thing is that it seems users didn't see any warning about it until it hit them, and it stirred up some responses in the user groups. It's still unclear where it's heading. So if you use one of these services, it's firstly impacting new users that will not be able to join, but existing customers are for now carry on serving. But if you are a user, I would recommend looking into what's heading with that. But beyond the tactical thing here, I think this is part of a realization that AWS has reached, which is that the one-stop shop, the one-stop cloud shop, if you wish, approach has failed. It's AWS can't be everything to everyone, and I know AWS has done expanding for so many services, especially from infra back to development environments and so on. But there's a long way to go from infra to dev. That's my take on that. I published something about that. I'll paste the link here for those who are curious, and obviously curious to hear the thoughts in the audience about what you think about what I said and what I wrote. What did you think about that, Radek?
Well, my 2 cents, seek for open source alternatives, of course. And this is another reason why Red Hat has been running with this idea of hybrid cloud for a while. Public cloud, in a sort of way, is a vendor lock-in, right? And it's great. It offers great services, but when something doesn't get the right number of users and the right revenue, you're going to be left without an option, right? So open source first thing, but then think about an exit path if you can.
Yeah, and the last thing before we run out of time, Jaeger version 2, the major release is cooking. The major thing with Jaeger, surprise, is the alignment with OpenTelemetry, something we've discussed here on this episode and also many other episodes. Jaeger has also reached that, and I'm really glad to see it, not just because I'm a CNCF ambassador and I'm an advocate of OpenTelemetry, but because there was a clear overlap between the projects, obviously with Jaeger actually predating OTel, so they've actually created many of these things even before OTel existed, but OTel becoming predominant is something that cannot be ignored. So there were some tweaks that have been done along the way to try and reconcile some of that, but V2 will have a complete re-architecture based on the OpenTelemetry collector with a promise of a simplified code base, binary configuration being simplified, and more. So definitely way to go to the team, to the maintainers of the project, and also great collaboration between the CNCF projects for unified open observability, which is what we talk about here. And great contribution, by the way, of interns through mentorship programs. So it's really open source community at its best. Really excited to see that. So I'm putting here also this update. Radek, I'm assuming that you were not surprised by the decision of the Jaeger project to align with OpenTelemetry.
Absolutely not. Actually, I will share also a blog post from our team where we're looking at how not only this change, but how we're eventually leading to an open telemetry only monitoring and observability platform. And this is like OpenTelemetry is a huge thing. We have a couple of really good engineers on the team. I really hope we can probably bring them to this podcast eventually and talk into greater details of where this is heading. It feels to me at least that we're still starting with OpenTelemetry and the potential is huge.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for your insights, and thanks a lot, Radek, for joining me on this episode.
Absolutely. Thanks as well.
Exciting to hear all the things there, and obviously thank you to all our listeners on the live stream and on the podcast shows. That's all for today. And if you are looking for this episode, or if you're on the live stream, all the episodes are available on all your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. So do check them out. And if you do listen to that on the podcast apps, then know that we stream the episodes live on Twitch and YouTube. So follow us on Twitter, or X as it's currently called, at OpenObserve, to get the live stream times and to stay updated on more deep dives like this one. And with that, I'll say one last note. I mentioned the PromCon that is taking place next month in September. So that's actually going to be also the topic of the next episode. I'll cover the highlights with no other than Julius Volz, the creator of Prometheus. So again, follow the show on Twitter or X, and follow me on LinkedIn, Mastodon, Twitter, whatever you prefer, to stay tuned on the live stream. It's going to be fascinating to hear the major V3 for Prometheus. So that's for next month's episode. And until next month, thank you very much for listening, and may the open source be with you.
Thank you.